Hello, I'm Felipe Witchger. I got my start as a consultant for oil and gas firms. I remember creating a presentation for Rex Tillerson when he was CEO of ExxonMobil and thinking about the geopolitics of oil as it pertains to climate and how do we deal with a carbon constrained world. And some of those questions led me to how do you build power, and kind of a frustration with the environmental movement not able to pass climate policy in 2009. And that alerted me to community organizing and the grassroots power building. And from that, I helped start a cooperative that grew to about 20 million in contracts for churches and schools, facilitating their collaboration on economic transactions. And that cooperative helped me see how one of the ways we can embed social and environmental impact into our organizations is through alternative governance and ownership. So I'm going to take you a quick tour through some of the cooperative landscape as I understand it today, the established ecosystem, the emerging ecosystem, the pressures on conventional business. And from there, we'll talk a little about shared ownership and what is the solidarity economy. So just to get us started, from my perspective, there's some main pressures on corporate structure today. From the climate perspective, there's three facts that I think are helpful. Currently, we emit about 35 gigatons of carbon per year. And the climate budget before runaway climate change, 2 degrees Celsius, the international consensus is 225 gigatons. That's the total amount we can emit before we get to that runaway climate change perspective. So you can see we have less than 10 years, maybe even 7 years. The really challenging part about this is there's 2,000 gigatons on the balance sheets, the market capitalization, the share price of ExxonMobil and BP, all of the large oil and gas firms, Chevron, is predicated on them producing this amount of hydrocarbons. So there's a disconnect in finance today that hasn't been rationalized. People call it the underpriced carbon climate risk. And so finance is trying to reckon with this carbon math. Then in big business, you have folks like Doug here McMillan, the CEO of Walmart, says that the concurrent health, economic, and racial crises have made clear that various systems are interconnected and that multi-stakeholder capitalism is the answer to addressing these challenges holistically. To me, that means there's going to be a lot more conflict. We need a lot more good facilitation to help navigate through complicated stakeholders coming together. Even private equity, one of the largest private equity firms, KKR, has employee ownership as the key strategy for making their manufacturing business work. Pete Stavros has donated $20 million of his own money to help start a new employee ownership organization. And I think social movements from Black Lives Matter to the gig economy are also putting pressure on our traditional corporate structures, all saying that I think we need different governance, different kind of ownership structures. And to me, all of that is a call for different kinds of how we work together. So to give us a sense of what some of those structures might be, the cooperative landscape to me offers one of the most established examples of that. And there's about 6 big established sectors. The credit union parts of our economy, about 10% of household savings are held in credit unions. Insurance, you might recognize nationwide. About 20 to 30% of all policies are underwritten by mutual organizations. And agriculture, about 30% of all agricultural supply, Organic Valley, Land O'Lakes, Dairy Farmers of America, CoBank, and energy, about 13% of all Americans get their energy from rural electric cooperatives. And then there's also purchasing cooperatives, food, but these are less significant parts of their own landscape. So as we think about these different established US cooperatives I just mentioned, they all roll up into something called the National Cooperative Business Association, and that's connected to the International Cooperative Alliance that kind of sets the agenda. But there's also evolving interests of capital that are changing new frontiers in shared ownership, evolving public policy interests. I think labor movements, other social movements are reform Silicon Valley folks like Zebras Unite are coming on the scene. There's new startup accelerators for cooperatives. Religious institutions have had a huge legacy supporting and funding cooperatives, especially the Catholic Campaign Human Development. And there's a huge trend in employee ownership, I think, as well, that's burgeoning. And there's 2 main types to understand. There's employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, that offer ownership. For example, Publix has 200,000 employee owners, but they don't have any control in the business. There's no actual governance power for them. Whereas worker cooperatives have both ownership and control. And it's these worker governed institutions that I think that are part of the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives, the Democracy at Work Institute, Democracy Collaborative. These are the ones that I think are really folks for you to be aware of. I think they need particular support in terms of how they do different governance. And I think there's lots of new trends and all kinds of business that are trying to be more ethical around hierarchy-like kinds of organization, or using sociocracy or self-management as new philosophies that I'm hearing about. So just wanted to give you a little bit overview of the solidarity economy as I see it, that is this growing social movements that are trying to provide real alternatives to capitalism, where communities govern themselves through participatory democracy, cooperative public ownership, and a culture of solidarity and respect for the earth. So I'll pause there and wonder if there's any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Felipe. So, it is around us, and I think we touch into it in our lives. We might be members of cooperatives ourselves, but as facilitators and trainers of this legacy of methods that comes out of this same kind of deep respect for collaborative work to solve social problems, talk to us about, what should we be positioning ourselves for? What should we be learning about, to perhaps take risks to try to offer services or attract people to our trainings that are in these sectors?
Well, I think so many folks in the nonprofit and social space have, and even in socially conscious business and B Corp, I think there's so much trend to recognize that traditional hierarchical management doesn't even work for millennial and Gen Z people. They want more autonomy, more freedom. I think in this whole new environment with remote work, we're reevaluating traditional management structures. So to me, one book that has been very influential that is something called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick, Lalo. And this is kind of a field of self-management that has emerged. And I think there's a lot that workers want more agency and more say. And a lot of worker cooperatives have designed really effective online tools for collaborative decision-making. The cooperative I was a part of, the Community Purchasing Alliance, about 2 or 3 years ago, adopted something called Sociocracy. And so all of our decisions and proposals we have a consent-based decision-making process, and you type your proposal in and everyone has to vote on it. And just a few months ago, I was hearing about proposals that were, people said, no, we disagree with that. And they're actually going to block things because that is outside their sphere of tolerance. And all that, to me, just alerts that we're learning how to facilitate new kinds of spaces, even in environments where business has to make hard decisions in relatively quick timeframes. And as this is a 10-person organization, but as you think of 20 and 50-person organizations, there's facilitation at all levels that I think is needed to build a culture of belief in each other, and a culture of trust for each other, and a culture of shared sense of mission and purpose, because companies increasingly are going to be more purpose driven. It is not going to be just solely the profit. It's going to be the social mission that's going to be more held in tension with the kind of capitalist tendencies that are ingrained in so many of us. But I think as the social piece becomes more significant for more organizations, balancing those requires new sets of skills of balancing more human interests.
And having a little process in mind, in many settings, right?
And too few, I think too many of the spaces I'm in philanthropy today don't even have a sense of how top methods could offer. My limited exposure to top methods is just, it gives a whole nomenclature, a whole way of imagining much more interactive spaces. And I think so people have that deeply participatory, engaging online and in person imagination of how to use all the tools available to them. That in particular, what frustrates me is when philanthropists gather grantees together and put them in a room and hire facilitators that just say, here, go an hour and work together and come back with a good proposal, and don't give any of the process that I think your methods have to offer. And I think the more people that are exposed, the more they can realize there is a way to do this. And I think the solidarity economy has, in cities with participatory budgeting, has good examples of how they have used participatory processes to include community input in a way that community members feel like agency. And I think that's what I think your methods do, offer dignity. And I think more people are looking for people to have a sense of agency in their world and their lives in a way that many traditional businesses don't offer that.
Thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you. Good luck.
Have a little conversation about this. Thank you so much.